I'm Dave Thomas, and in this video I'll be showing you how to build the Rocketarium VK-7 model rocket. This is a two-engine clustered model rocket, and it is a scale model of an actual sounding rocket. This is considered an intermediate kit, so you'll want to have built at least a few model rockets before going on to this. But overall the kit is relatively straightforward to build. Much of the intermediate part of it is simply because it is a cluster rocket, and there are some detail pieces which give it some fine finishing here. So let's take a look at the inside. Okay, so check on the back page of the instructions. Also be careful, sometimes the decals are nested within the instruction pages, and so those may fall out or get bent. Okay, so we've got here two body tubes, a 15-inch and a 9-inch. Okay, a white nose cone, 4 basswood fins, and these already have a lot of the detail cut into them. I really like those. We have a small parts bag here that contains the shock cord, launch lugs, and detail pieces. Some of these will go on the fins, others go on the launch lugs. Okay, the rocket motor assembly is in its own little package here, and this is the cluster mount. Similarly, the ejection baffle also comes in its own packaging here. Alright, and then we have these 3 rings. These are detail pieces that will go over the main body tube toward the end of the build. Alright, have a nice blue parachute here. And then there are 3 sheets of decals. These are all vinyl. So one of them is simply a black stripe there. And then we've got some numbers and letters, and those may be kind of hard to see right now. But 2 sheets of those. One's black and one's white. And so that looks like we have everything we need. Okay. So I'll put most of this away and we will get started here. Alright, do make sure that you read through all of the instructions before starting the kit. That will help prevent errors. And even sometimes when we do that, we still get errors. Now, before we go on to the first step here, I do want to call your attention to the fins. These are made of basswood, and so is a much tighter grain than balsa is. If you want to seal the fins or otherwise treat them before mounting them, now is a good time to do that. Personally, I found that with basswood, after I've shaped it and just given it some light sanding, that's usually enough, and then primer will fill in any other imperfections there. So I usually don't worry about things like sanding sealer with these. But if you want to do so, you certainly can, but you want to do it ahead of time so that they're ready to go when we get to the fin mounting part. The first step is actually to construct the motor mount, and so it has its own little set of instructions here. Well, those scissors are really dull. There we go. Okay, so pull out these instructions, and just like with the main instructions, it's a good idea to go through this before you start building. Okay, but we have 2 motor tubes, and probably inside of one of them is this yellow spacer tube. Make sure you find that. Okay, we have 2 wood centering rings. We have 2 engine clips. And then we have this single retainer ring set here. This is what looks to be 3D printed. And this will act as the clip retainers for both of the motor mounts. And then 2 engine blocks here. The first step calls for us to apply glue to one end of one of these motor tubes, and it says 3/4 of an inch inside. And so the idea here is we'll put glue down in here, all right, and then this spacer will push one of these engine block rings up into the glue. So if we put glue on this side, we put the ring on this side, and we'll push that spacer all the way until it's flush, and then take that right back out again, and we would end up with a engine block up there in the tube. So if you take a look at where that was dry fitting it, that'll give you an idea of where you need to put your glue. All right, so for these types of things, I like to use wood glue and an applicator of some sort. This is basically just a long Q-tip. Alright, and going down in here, this will become the forward end of the tube. Alright, I just put a ring of glue around in there. And just like I did with the dry fit, we'll put in the engine block and the spacer, and now I'm just going to push this down on the table. Alright, and you can see there how it's pushed the glue ahead of the ring, and now I want to immediately take out that spacer so we don't glue it inside. Okay, and then we're going to do the same thing here with the second one. Alright, and once again insert the engine block, spacer, squish that upward, makes a nice fillet of glue there, and pull that back out. And we need to let those dry for about 10 minutes before we go on to the next step. My glue is dry enough to work with. It's still wet in there, but we're not going to move the engine blocks by any of my actions here. First of all, I do want to mark the aft end as such, just to prevent confusion later on. So this will be the end without the engine blocks in them. Okay, and so next we need to measure where our engine clips are going to go, and this needs to be at 2 3/4 inches from the aft end. So I'm going to measure that. And I'm just going to put a little tick mark here, and then do the same thing for my other tube. Now if everything was placed appropriately, that tick mark is right at the top of the engine block. So the next thing we'll do is simply take a hobby knife here, and we're going to cut a small slit, about 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch, where that mark is, and we'll be able to look in here. So if you're meeting a lot of resistance, it means you're probably hitting the engine block. Alright, there you can see the tip of my knife right above the engine block. I'm just going to open that enough to allow one of these clips to go in. So once that's there, I can just pop this in. Okay, and then I can do the same thing for the other one. So once more, at that mark, and we'll look in, okay, right there above. And once more, take the other clip and pop it in there. Okay, so the top of the clip there actually reinforces the engine block. Alright, now we're going to have to make a few more marks here. So we're going to make a mark. Oops, there we go. At 1/4 of an inch from the aft end. And you want to do this a little bit away from the engine clip so it doesn't cover your marks. So make one mark right there, and another mark at 1 1/4 inches. So that's going to be right up here. And I'll do that for the other tube. There's a 1/4 inch and 1 1/4 inch. Okay, so I'm going to do this as a dry fit first. So the centering ring marked F, this is the forward centering ring. That is going to come down over the forward end. And this is a reason to dry fit it first, is this one is really tight. And you may need to sand the inside of this. Okay, so let's see if I can get this on without sanding. There we go, I can just squeeze it on there. Alright, now this little notch is for the engine clip. And so this is going to fit just like that right over the engine clip. And then we'll do the same thing on this side. Okay, there we go. Oh, I had it. There we go. Just squeeze it in there. Alright, and once more we're going to turn this and fit that engine clip through. Okay, so this should be right over the top of the engine clips, and then the front ends, forward ends, should be even. So I'm just going to kind of push both down so they're at the same level there. Alright, the next piece is this retainer clip. This is going to come in from the aft end over both, and that's going to go up here to that 1 1/4 mark. And so that just keeps the clips from flopping around in there. And then the last piece, and this will be the hardest to get on because we don't have a lot of room to play in there. This is going to go over the aft end. You'll have to kind of play those in a little bit. Okay, so that's going to go there, and that's going to go up to that 1/4 inch mark. Just like that. Okay, so right now nothing's been glued. Now for the forward centering ring and the aft centering ring, I'll go ahead and use wood glue again. And then for this retaining ring assembly, I will use thick cyanoacrylate glue for that. Because we need to get a good bond between the plastic and the cardboard, and regular CA glue does not work well on porous surfaces, and regular Elmer's or wood glue does not work well on plastic, so this gives us a good compromise. Okay. And actually, since this is 3D printed, it's got some rough surfaces. Probably, if you don't have any thick cyanoacrylate, this will probably still work with wood glue because it will give the glue something to bite into, and there's actually no strain on this. This is just keeping your motor clips in place. So if you don't have any of the thick cyanoacrylate or super glue, I would just use wood glue on this. Okay. So now that we've got this together, what I'm going to do is first of all move the forward ring down a little bit and apply glue to that. Okay, so I'm going to use one of these applicators again. Okay, and I'm just going to run a bead of glue all the way around. Now it starts out kind of thick there. Around the edges, we got to be careful that we don't have stuff slopping over, or it may not fit into the rocket properly. So we're just going to move things about there. Okay, and now I'm just going to move that back to where it's just at the ends. Of those clips. Okay, and again I'm going to make sure that my two tubes there are flush with each other. Okay, so that looks pretty. I'm just going to see if I can squeegee off some of this excess here or put it to better use. Okay, and then for a similar fashion here, we'll do the aft centering ring and just scoot it forward a bit. And once more, I'm just going to apply glue and a bead around there. Now when you're gluing, you may cover up your line, so you can either redraw the line or just have a good idea where it is. So there's my line right there for that one. So I'll just try and refrain from getting glue right over it. Alright, you also want to be careful you don't get glue down inside the little square areas there that are meant for clearance for the clip. Most likely the clip will come undone again if you do get glue on it. But you don't need to make things any harder for yourself than you need to. Alright, and now holding on to both tubes, go ahead and bring that forward again. And it is tight. Keep that in mind. You might want to use white glue here just because it does give you a longer working time. That's up to your own preference. Okay. And then for this last part, I'm going to use thick super glue. And so here I'm going to move this forward so I can find my mark there. And now I'll just put a bead of super glue, and I'm going to keep it away from the clips themselves. I don't want to glue the clips. And just bring that around. Again, try to avoid the clip. Okay, and then I'll just slide that down. Actually, I had that up quite a ways, but slide it down to the mark that we made here at 1 1/4 inches. Alright, we've got a little excess up here. It's not a big deal, just let that dry. While the glue on the engine mount is drying, we can go on to the other sub-assembly, the ejection baffle, and assemble that. So very quickly here, we'll just open this up. And they're pretty basic, and they come with their own instructions. Alright, so we should have a coupler and then 2 baffle plates. And whichever design you get, the idea here is that the holes in the baffle are offset. Either this way, where you have some in the center and some around the circumference, or in some cases it may be half on one side and half on the other. They all work in the same way in that they prevent the direct flow of hot gases from the ejection charge to the parachute, and instead make those gases bounce around and become turbulent in here, giving them time to cool off before reaching the parachute. So we will start by putting this screw eye into the forward baffle plate here, and it has a little hole just for doing this. And here I'm going to use just a little bit of wood glue. White glue will also work here. Wood glue is a little bit stronger and it also dries faster. And so I'm just going to put a little dollop right on that hole. And now I'm going to screw down the screw eye just until I can't see that top thread anymore. I don't want to go past it. I don't want the blank shank here down in the wood. Okay, and then on the back side, it's pushed some of the glue through, and I'm just going to add a little bit more to that, and that'll just give us a really good strong anchor here. Okay, now I'm going to let that dry for a little bit, and while that is drying, I'm going to put a bead of glue here around the inside edge of one end of the coupler, doesn't matter which. Okay, I'm going to smooth that around with my finger. If you get any on the outside, like I got there, just go ahead and wipe that off, because we don't want to increase the circumference of the coupler. Alright, then we're going to take our other baffle plate and just push that into the glue. Alright, and I want to put that in so there's just a little bit of a lip of the coupler above the plate there. Okay. Alright, and now I'm going to let both of those pieces just sit still and dry for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then I'll come back to put everything back together. My glue has pretty much completely dried on both sections now, and so now I'm going to put another bead of glue in here. Like that. And I'm going to spread this a bit thinner, but also a bit wider than I did the previous one. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to put this in edgewise and then flip it up like that, and then I'm going to pull it forward a bit and give it just a little bit of a twist. Okay, and then for the most part doing this pulls the glue into the spaces here and forms a little fillet. There's a little blank space here, and I'm just going to take this excess glue on my finger here and just put that right along the edge. Alright, now I'm going to turn it back over to the other side, and I'm just going to put a small fillet of glue in here, because this will have to take the force of the ejection charge on it, so you do want it well reinforced. And again, I'm just going to take a finger here and smear that around. Okay, let's see if we can get a close-up here. Alright, so this will form a fillet in there, and on this side, simply pulling the plate forward helps form a fillet around here. Now this just needs to dry for about half an hour, and then it will be ready to go into your model rocket. While the glue on the ejection baffle and the motor mount is drying, our next step is to mark the fin locations on the body tube. And so simply cut this out of the back page of your instructions, and if you don't want to destroy the instructions, just make a photocopy of it before you do so. Alright, take the main body tube, the longer one, and we're going to mark one end as aft. And then our fin marking guide is going to go around that end. Okay, you just want enough clearance that you can mark on both sides of it. and then we'll line up the two tick marks there. And just put a little piece of tape on that. And get just a little bit on the tube, and that'll keep it from shifting as you mark. Okay, and now we just mark each side. The unmarked lines here for the fins, the one that says launch lug is obviously for the launch lug. And I'm going to mark a little LL here. And then just continue around. And we need to extend these lines down the length of the tube. The launch lug line will be extended the entire length of the tube. The fin line's only about halfway. Now the traditional way is to use a door frame, or you can use a tube marking guide like this one from Estes, which works a lot better if you're doing this under a camera. Right, but it's just got a whole bunch of straight edges here for different size tubes. So I'm going to start here with my launch lug line. I'll bring this up so it's easier to see. Okay, and let's see here. There we go. Alright, so the launch lug line goes all the way down. The fin lines don't have to go that far. Okay, now it's going to be harder to see this. So just about halfway down is fine. Alright, so we should have 4 fin lines and then 1 launch lug line there. On the launch lug line, we need to measure 9 inches from the aft end. And this is where the forward launch lug will go. The other will simply be flush with the aft end. Okay, and something we can do before we get to attaching the fins is to roughen the areas where the fins will be glued on. So here, if we take a fin and just place that on here, and the aft end of the fin will be flush with the aft end of the body tube there. But I just want an idea of how far up we need to go here. So about a third of the way or so up the tube. We can lightly sand along our lines here, and this will roughen up this glossy glassine finish here and allow the glue to grab better. So to do that, just use some fine sandpaper, anywhere from 100 to 220. It doesn't make a big difference which type you use. Okay, so I'm just going to roughen this up a little bit here. And you may need to redraw your line after you've done this. It's not a big deal. Okay, now for the launch lug, I'm going to roughen up right down here. And also up here where I made that mark at 9 inches, so just above that. Okay, and and then back down here. Alright. Now back to the instructions. This indicates the next thing to do is to prepare the launch lugs. Now we're going to do part of this, so the first thing we're going to do is add this little strip to the bottom of the launch lug, and that will clear it above the detail pieces that will go on later. But we're not going to attach them yet. I like to use a fin alignment guide that slips over the body tube, and if you have launch lugs in place already, that type of a fin alignment guide will not work. So I'm going to delay attaching them to the body just yet. All right, but inside our small parts bag here, we want to pull out the two long strips. There's one of them there, and the other one here along with the launch lugs. And for this, I'm just going to run a bead of glue along one of these strips. And you don't want it really heavy, but you do want it uniform. And then I'm simply going to attach this to one of the launch lugs. And the only thing you really got to make sure of here is that it's straight. Okay, and then you can just smooth in any remaining glue on the sides. And set that aside to dry. And then do the same thing on the second one. And then once again set that one aside to dry. My next step is to prepare the fins, and here I'm going to do two things. One is to simply sand the surface here, bring the grain down a little bit, and I'm just going to use a sanding block or a sanding tee here with some 100 grit to 120 grit sandpaper. Alright, and just sand this with the grain. Alright, and do this on both sides until you reach your desired level of smoothness. And then I'm going to go ahead and just briefly sand the edges to remove any loose sooty material here from the laser cutting. You don't have to get all of it off. Just want to make sure that you've got a good binding surface. And this is most important for the root edge. The other edges are less so. And then the instructions call for rounding over or tapering the leading edge here. And so again, you can just use a little bit of medium to fine sandpaper here. And I just start by smoothing out the corners and just alternating back and forth until you have either a taper or a rounded edge, whichever you prefer. And as you do this, you can look at it in cross-section and see how well rounded or tapered that you have it. And so I'm just going to keep doing this back and forth until I get the taper that I want. And I'll do the other 3 fins as well off camera. I've shaped and sanded my fins, and so our next part here is to attach them to the body tube. So I'm going to start with just putting down a thin bead of glue here. We don't want to use too much, just enough to get a nice even surface. So I'm going to smooth that out even some more. Alright, and then I'm going to attach this along my fin line. Then I'll pull it right back off again. I'm going to let this dry for about 30 seconds and then come back and put it on. My glue has become a little bit tacky now, and so I'm going to put the fin back on. And remember, we want the fin flush with the body tube here, so I'm going to stand it up just to make sure we are still flush. And then press that on. Okay, and then I'm going to come back and make sure I'm properly aligned, front and back. Alright, and then if you want to use a fin alignment guide, you can slip that on. And go ahead and slip it over that first fin. Now, depending on your guide, it may or may not fit over that little tab there, but this should be enough. Alright, and let that dry, and then do the same thing for the other 3 fins, and I will do that off camera. My fins and my motor mount glues are dry, and so I'm going to come back here. We had skipped over the motor mount installation simply because we were waiting for the glue to dry, and it was more efficient to go ahead and put the fins on. But now that that's done, we can come back to this step. And if you're building this on your own, there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't just follow the instructions the way they are. As I said, I just skipped around here a little bit for better use of time. And so our motor mount here is going to go into the aft end of the rocket. And I'm just going to dry fit this to make sure everything is as it should be. Okay, and when this is in its proper place, the motor tubes here should be flush with the body tube, and the clip should still be hanging out here. Okay, so I'm going to pull that back out and get my wood glue and an applicator here. Okay, so if I just do a quick measurement here, and put my thumb right about here, this will give me enough space inside to put my first ring of glue. And then as I push this forward, we'll put another ring of glue toward the aft end, and as we push it fully in, both centering rings in will be seated in their own beads of glue. Okay. So using my thumbnail as a guide, I'm going to insert this in and then just rotate it around. I'm going to go ahead and get a little bit more here. Okay, and then I'm going to partially insert the motor mount here and then let it hang down while I get some more glue. And this is going to go just inside the body tube here. And I can turn this around and just let that motor mount shift. Okay, and then do the inside here. Okay, and then I'm just going to give it a little bit of a turn so I can get the areas that were being hidden by the sides of the motor mount. And you want to do this fairly quickly so that we don't have the glue starting to set up front before we get the aft glue done. All right, and I'm just going to push this in, and I'm going to align it here with the fins. Okay, push that all the way in and then make it flush. And you can use a ruler here to make sure that you're flush with the body tube. Okay, so that looks pretty good all the way around there. If you want, you can actually add some fillets of glue to the centering ring there to give you an even stronger mount. But having the 2 rings of glue, one for each centering ring, gives you a pretty strong mount there already. And so the rest of it's, if you're extra paranoid and want to make sure that thing's not going anywhere, go ahead and put a fillet in. It won't hurt. Speaking of fillets, now that the fins are dry, we need to put glue fillets along the edges here. So I'm just going to take my glue and just squeeze a bead out in there. All right, we got a problem with my glue here. Take my glue and just run it along the inside edge, and then take a finger here and smooth that in. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the fin facing it here. Once more, I'm going to fill that in. Go both ways there. Okay, and let this dry for a few minutes before you go on to the next set of facing fins. That way you're less likely to have runs or drips in the glue there. And you may have to get rid of a little bit of excess glue here. Okay, but I'm going to let that dry for 5 or 10 minutes and then do the same for the other fins there. Okay, we can also put the launch lugs on. This is another step we skipped because of the fin alignment guide I was using. So we can take our launch lugs here. Put a bead of glue on them. Okay, and if you recall, the first one is going to go down here, flush with the aft end of the body tube. And you really don't need to wait for the glue to get tacky on these because there's not a lot of force on them. So I'm going to let this dry for at least 10 minutes. And then off camera I will finish up the fillets on the fins and on the launch lug, and then we'll come back to do the detail work on the fins.